Alright, so hey everyone. Today I want to take a look at the Deadzones for Abyssus. This is being demonstrated on the Xbox Series X. And to start, both the movement and the camera Deadzones are 20% axial Deadzones. So that creates a central square of no movement. Axial deadzones apply to the entirety of each axis, and when outside the central deadzone, that creates regions of limited diagonal movement. So if you're within the axial deadzones, you can only move in one of four directions. So in this case, forward and back, right and left. You only start seeing diagonal movement occur when you break out of both axis deadzones, represented by these green regions. And this might be a little clearer if I try to, say, use this as a reference. And then when I stay within the axial dead zone, I stay pretty well aligned. And then when I break out of both axial dead zones, you can see that I'm drifting to the left in this case. For the movement curve, we have a linear curve. So you start out at your slowest possible speeds, and as you move the stick further, you move faster. So just a smooth linear transition from the dead zone to full speed. The camera is the same, so there's a 20% axial dead zone, and the same restricted diagonal movement. I'm bobbing the stick, but you can see that the crosshair is staying perfectly horizontal, and I can point at nearly a 45-degree angle, and as long as I'm still within the axial dead zone, I'm moving perfectly horizontally. It isn't until I break out of both where diagonal movement begins. And this is most obvious when capping the view down like this, or at the top, and looking for horizontal movement. The curve is also linear and just increases just like movement did. This curve is likely applied per axis, meaning it takes the distance off of each axis separately, how far away you are from the horizontal axis and the vertical axis, and applies the curves separately to them. This is separate from applying a curve per magnitude, so the distance from the center. This actually doesn't matter with linear curves. Linear curves will function the same either way, but it does have a significant impact if another type of curve is used. But you can see that my thumbstick can lean outside of this circular region, and if your stick was able to move far enough to hit the corners of the analog module range, you actually would be able to move diagonally faster than your cardinal and vertical maximums, and up to 1.4 times when moving at a perfect diagonal. The magnitudes aren't capped, so they allow that, where ideally they would be capped, and that would make it so that any direction you point the stick caps out at 100% output. Most players aren't going to be able to move their sticks that far. As you can see, mine doesn't move that far, and probably does make much difference with how the axial dead zones will warp diagonal movement anyway. But players who have sticks that can lean that far might be able to notice that diagonal movements are faster. But as far as the horizontal and vertical sensitivities, there actually are some gameplay separate sliders to control this, and these are the default values right now. And the vertical sensitivity slider is actually weighted below the horizontal sensitivity. So if we raise this to 70 just to, oops, there we go. We can see this is the horizontal sensitivity, and this is the vertical sensitivity. The vertical sensitivity is about 40% of the horizontal at the same values. So vertical sensitivity is already much slower than the horizontal, but by default it's even slower than that. And this of course makes your vertical sensitivity very slow, but in most implementations, having different axis sensitivities changes your diagonal movement. And if I move at about 45 degrees, you can see that the direction the cursor moves is very flat. It's very horizontally biased. And when the camera sensitivities are set up separately like this, your angles are biased towards the more sensitive axis, and in this case horizontally. So your angles are incorrect because of that. Now, you can, since you have control of the horizontal and vertical sensitivities, you can attempt to correct this. However, if you want to play at even sensitivities, you can't play at over 40 horizontal sensitivity because the vertical sensitivity won't go high enough to allow it. So if we do this, you can see that this is 40 horizontal and this is 40 vertical. So about the same sensitivity. And this isn't a particularly fast sensitivity, so you are limiting yourself if you want the sensitivities to be even. If I move at 45 degrees though, you can see that that is much better conveyed. Another issue is it appears that there is aim smoothing applied, but specifically for the horizontal axis and not the vertical. So vertical, you can see, is very responsive, and it seems to change directions and move at its max speed instantly. Whereas horizontally, if I move back and forth, you can see that it's much more reduced than vertically, even though the speed at full tilt is the same, though after it's built up, is the same as the vertical sensitivity. So the horizontal movements are delayed essentially while it's building up to the speed that you're selecting, and this makes aiming feel very inconsistent if you're trying to track a target while jumping around them. And it also makes the vertical sensitivity feel more sensitive because your horizontal sensitivity is lagging behind it. So this really covers the controls, but there are quite a few issues that hopefully can be addressed. The first is the axial dead zones would be much better as radial dead zones. This would allow you to exit the dead zone the same distance from the center, no matter what angle, and should give you full diagonal movement. This game often has flying enemies, and having incorrect diagonal movement doesn't really help that, so switching to radial dead zones would address that as well. The next thing would be dead zone options. Larger dead zones make precise adjustments more difficult, so being able to lower the dead zones can greatly help with that. But for players who sticks are very worn, may want larger dead zones to avoid unwanted drift. The vertical sensitivity should be weighted the same as the horizontal, so that if you set them the same, they are the same. And as the default showed, they had the default vertical sensitivity already lower, so they could, if they wanted, simply lower the vertical sensitivity even more to keep the default ratio. But players, if the sensitivity was made the same, could then set them the same if they wanted them the same. The scope sensitivity actually is the same as the horizontal sensitivity. It's just a separate slider controlling that. But on top of that, it'd be good to have the aim smoothing either have a separate slider and then also apply it to vertical movements, so that it be consistent and then players could have general control of the smoothing, or simply remove it entirely so that players can have the maximum amount of responsiveness they can. The last option I'd like to request is an option for the acceleration curve. So we have linear curves being used here, which is perfectly fine, but some players may want more exponential curves to make precise adjustments more easily. And I think having a slider to control the degree of a power function would give players full control over the specific curve they'd like to use. One big thing is, though I mentioned that the curve is probably set up per axis, even though it didn't matter for a linear curve, it would matter if you were using any exponential curve. That would, applying an exponential curve axially will make the diagonal sensitivity in general slower, as well as greatly skew your diagonal movement. So that the curve implementation would need to be changed to be radial, and also the 100 plus magnitude diagonals that I mentioned would also have to be clamped to 100%, so that the diagonals won't be faster. With exponential curves, the excess diagonal speed can increase very rapidly, so that would need to be corrected if a curve slider were added. This game is pretty awesome, but hopefully these improvements can be made. There is aim assist in this game, but ideally you shouldn't need to use it. The controls can be improved so that it's very easy to make all the adjustments you need to play the game. One big credit I'd like to give is adding a VSync toggle. This is on right now just to make the video a little smoother, but it's really nice to get these options on console, because VSync, while fixing screen tearing, does add some input latency, and it depends on how many frames are buffered and whatnot, how much latency it adds. But being able to disable this greatly helps the responsiveness, so that is great. It's just hopefully we can see the controls improved to make the actual base controller input as ideal as possible. But that about covers things, so thanks for watching, and everyone, have a great rest of your day.